At 70 years old, I found myself standing at the entrance of my own beach house in Malibu, the keys trembling in my hands. What is this old parasite doing here? There's no room for you, my daughter-in-law, Jessica shouted at me from the terrace. I had arrived early that morning, expecting to find my house empty, as usual. My home had been invaded by her family. My furniture was ruined, my garden destroyed. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories reach. That Friday morning, I drove to my beach house in Malibu, as I had done hundreds of times over the last 20 years. The route was familiar, the curves of the coastal highway, the smell of salt in the air, the sight of palm trees swaying against the blue sky. This house represented everything I had achieved in my life. Every brick, every tile, every plant in the garden had been bought with the money I earned working as a seamstress ever since I was widowed. When I turned into the driveway, I noticed something strange. There were cars I didn't recognize parked in my garage. Loud music echoed from the property, a festive sound that seemed out of place in the quiet refuge I had created. As I parked, I felt a tightness in my chest, that sixth sense that warns us when something isn't right. When I got out of the car, the impact of what I saw took my breath away. My beautiful garden, which I tended to myself every weekend, was devastated. Empty beer cans dotted the perfectly cut lawn. Children were running across the terrace, kicking a ball against my pots of red geraniums that I cultivated with so much love. The wicker chairs I had bought the previous year were covered with wet towels and dirty clothes. I walked slowly towards the entrance, the keys weighing in my hands as never before. That's when I saw her. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, standing in the main doorway as if she owned the place. She was wearing my favorite apron, the one I had embroidered myself a decade ago. Her eyes had that cold look I knew so well. "Jessica, I didn't know you were here," I said, trying to stay calm despite the chaos around me. "This is my house. I come here every holiday weekend, for the last 20 years. She laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was a sound loaded with cruelty that made me feel small and insignificant, as if I were the intruder on my own property. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Robert told me we could use the house whenever we wanted. Besides, we're doing something productive here. You just come to complain and ruin our family plans." Before I could answer, more people began to appear behind her. Veronica, her sister, with her 2 teenage sons, her gray-haired mother who looked at me with disdain, an older man in a Hawaiian shirt, a young woman with a baby in her arms, and another man smoking calmly on my porch. They all looked at me as if I were the problem. "Is this the famous mother-in-law you talk about so much?" Jessica's mother asked, sizing me up from head to toe. I thought she'd be more imposing. She seems rather common. The snickers that followed hit me like arrows. There I was, at 70 years old, in my simple travel clothes, being ridiculed by strangers on the property I built with the sweat of my labor. "Where is Robert?" I asked, feeling my heart race. My son needed to be there to explain this absurd situation. "Robert is working, as always," Jessica replied, crossing her arms. "Unlike you, he has real responsibilities. Look, Eleanor, there's no room for you here. The bedrooms are all occupied. The kitchen is being used to prepare food for the whole family, and frankly, your presence is only going to create unnecessary tension." I stood there, paralyzed. She was actually kicking me out of my own house, the house I built brick by brick after my husband's death, the house I worked days and nights as a seamstress to pay for. "Besides," Jessica continued with a venomous smile, "I already spoke with Robert, and we agree that this house needs to be used more. It makes no sense for it to be empty most of the time while you live comfortably in Chicago. We have children who need space to grow." Her words hit me like stones. 20 years building this place after my husband died. 20 years paying every cent of the mortgage with the money I earned sewing clothes for other people's families. 20 years tending to every detail, every plant, every corner of this place that had become my personal sanctuary. "This house is mine, Jessica," I managed to say, though my voice sounded weaker than I would have liked. "I have the deeds. I pay all the bills. Oh, that's enough," she interrupted, raising her voice. "It's always the same thing. That it's yours, that you pay. Robert is your son, isn't he? What's yours is also his, and what's his is also mine. That's how normal families work. The children stopped playing, and everyone watched me in silence. I could feel their eyes judging me, waiting for my reaction. Humiliation burned my cheeks like fire, but something inside me refused to break. One of the teenagers, who seemed to be Jessica's niece, came closer and looked at me insolently. "Why don't you just go to a hotel? There's no space for anyone else here." "All right, dear," I finally said with a smile that came from my soul, but which I knew didn't reach my eyes. "I understand the situation perfectly." Jessica smiled triumphantly, believing she had won. The others seemed satisfied, as if they had witnessed a just victory. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I walked back to my car with slow, dignified steps. As I drove away to find a hotel, my mind traveled to the past, to when this property was nothing more than a vacant lot full of weeds and dreams. I was 50 years old back then, Robert barely 25. It was just the two of us against the world, and I had made the most important decision of my life to build a refuge for our family. The Pacific View Inn cost me $285 a night, money I hadn't planned on spending because I was supposed to be sleeping in my own bed. But there I was, checking in like any other tourist while my house was occupied by invaders who felt entitled to my property. That night, sitting on the hotel balcony, looking at the lights of my house in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. A cold, calculated anger beginning to form inside me. It wasn't that impulsive anger that makes you scream and lose control. It was something much more dangerous. It was the intelligent anger of a woman who had survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of hard work. Jessica had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated Eleanor Vance. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m, after a night of restless sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's arrogant smile and heard her venomous words echoing in my mind. I had a quick coffee in the hotel restaurant and decided to go back to the house to try for a calmer conversation. Maybe it had been a misunderstanding. Maybe Robert would show up and put an end to this absurd situation. When I arrived at 8 a.m, I found the front door locked my own door. I had to ring the doorbell as if I were a visitor. Veronica, Jessica's sister, opened it, still in her pajamas and with an angry face. "What do you want now?" she asked, without even greeting me. I explained that I needed to pick up some personal things and talk to Jessica. Her response left me stunned. "Jessica is sleeping, and your things aren't here anymore. We put them in bags in the garage so they wouldn't be in the way." My things, in bags, in the garage, as if they were trash. I felt as if I had been stabbed in the chest. She let me in, but I felt like an intruder in my own home. The smell was different, a mix of strange food, cigarette smoke, and cheap perfume. The living room was unrecognizable, filled with inflatable mattresses and clothes scattered everywhere. When I entered the kitchen, my heart almost stopped. My beautiful kitchen, the one I designed thinking of all the family meals I would prepare there, was completely destroyed. The stove was covered in burnt grease, the sink overflowing with dirty dishes that already smelled bad. My best pans had permanent stains on the bottom. "Where are my porcelain plates?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Oh, some of them broke. The kids were playing and you know how they are. Jessica says they were very old anyway." My porcelain plates, which I bought one by one over the years, saving up to complete the set, which I only used on special occasions because I treated them like treasures, were broken, discarded, as if they had no value. I went upstairs to my master bedroom, the sanctuary where I had planned to rest. The door was open, and inside was Jessica's mother, organizing clothes in my closet as if it were her own. "Excuse me," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "This is my room." "Ah," my daughter Jessica explained everything. "Don't worry, I'll take very good care of your things. Look, I even organized your clothes in these bags so they don't get wrinkled. My dresses, my blouses, my shoes, all my personal clothing was stuffed into plastic bags like items destined for donation. 2 unknown boys were sleeping in my bed, and my favorite pillows were on the floor, covered in stains." As I took in this surreal scene, I noticed something that caught my attention. My secret closet, That hidden space behind the main wardrobe where I kept important documents and items of sentimental value, was ajar. A place that no one but me should know about. With my heart pounding, I waited for Jessica's mother to leave the room for a moment and went to the closet. The space had been completely violated. My documents were in disarray, some on the floor. The jewelry I inherited from my mother was gone. The property deeds for the house were crumpled, as if someone had looked through them carelessly. But the most alarming thing was finding papers that weren't mine. Legal documents with Robert and Jessica's names on them. I took them with trembling hands and read quickly. It was an application for a change of ownership. They wanted to transfer the house into Robert's name, claiming that I, due to my advanced age and deteriorating mental condition, was no longer capable of managing valuable properties. Deteriorating mental condition. Me, the woman who had managed her finances perfectly for 70 years, who had built a fortune from scratch, who still worked and maintained her financial independence. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house. The paper was dated from the previous week. This confirmed that the invasion hadn't been spontaneous, but part of an elaborate plan to take over my property using the law in their favor. At the bottom of the papers, I found something that chilled me to the bone. A real estate appraisal. It had valued my beach house at $300,000, and there was a handwritten note in Jessica's script. With this money, we can buy a bigger apartment and send the kids to private school. We just need R to sign the papers, and for the little old lady not to cause any problems. The little old lady. That's what they called me behind my back. The little old lady who shouldn't cause problems while they stripped me of everything I had built in my life. I put all the documents in my bag as evidence. This wasn't just a family invasion. It was a planned robbery, an elaborate fraud to strip me of my life's work with my own blood as an accomplice. I went downstairs silently, and as I passed the hallway, I heard Jessica on the phone on the terrace. She was talking loudly without worrying about being discreet. "No, Mom, don't worry. The lawyer says it's very easy. Since Robert is an only child, he can claim the inheritance in advance due to the mother's incapacity. And once the house is in his name, we can do whatever we want with it. Advance inheritance due to incapacity. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my inheritance while I was still alive. Yes, we already sent the fake medical papers. We paid $50 to that doctor from the cheap clinic to sign a report saying she has senile dementia. Robert didn't want to at first, but I explained to him that it's for the good of the children. Fake medical papers, a corrupt doctor, a fabricated report of senile dementia. My own son convinced that stripping me of my property was for the good of the children. I left the house without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to talk about. Words had lost all their meaning. This was no longer a family dispute that could be resolved with conversations and good feelings. This was a war, and they had fired the first shot using the dirtiest weapons possible. Lies, false documents, medical corruption, and the manipulation of my own son. On the way back to the hotel, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from determination. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Eleanor Vance would not be a victim of this betrayal. She would be the protagonist of her own justice. On Monday morning, I drove straight to the bank. I needed to verify exactly how much money I had available for this war. For the last 20 years, I had continued to save religiously, even after finishing paying off the house. Every month, I put away $300 from my pension and the income from my sewing work. I learned early on that saved money was power, it was security, it was freedom. The bank manager, Mr. Davis, had known me for 15 years, a serious and professional man who had always respected my financial discipline. "Eleanor, how can I help you today?" he asked with a warm smile. "I need the exact balance of all my accounts, and I need to talk about a sensitive legal matter." When he showed me the numbers on the screen, I smiled for the first time in days. I had $87,000 in savings, plus $23,000 in certificates of deposit, and $12,000 in my checking account. $122,000 in total. Jessica had been mistaken. She thought I was a poor little old lady who depended only on a miserable pension. She didn't know that Eleanor Vance had been a tireless worker her whole life, saving every penny to protect herself from exactly this kind of situation. "Mr. Davis, I need you to freeze any attempts by third parties to access my accounts, and I need an official letter from the bank confirming my mental capacity to manage my finances. Of course, Eleanor. Is there a problem? My family is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent to take my assets. His face grew serious. This is very serious. Do you need a recommendation for a specialized lawyer? Yes, please. He gave me the name and phone number of Thomas Grant, a lawyer specializing in family law and property fraud. He's the best in these types of cases. Tell him I sent you. I left the bank with a new energy coursing through my veins. It wasn't just the peace of mind of knowing I had the financial resources to defend myself. It was the mental clarity of having a concrete plan of action. I called Thomas Grant from the parking lot. The secretary gave me an appointment for that same afternoon. The attorney can see you at 4 o'clock. It's urgent, isn't it? Very urgent. I spent the rest of the morning organizing all the documents I had collected. The fake property transfer papers, photos of the damage to my house, the list of stolen items, and copies of all my legitimate property deeds. I also printed out screenshots of Veronica's social media, where she was bragging about her new beach house. At 4 o'clock, I was sitting in Thomas Grant's elegant office. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and intelligent eyes that inspired immediate confidence. Mrs. Vance, tell me everything from the beginning. Don't omit a single detail. I narrated the entire story, the invasion of my house, Jessica's humiliations, the fraudulent documents, the fake medical report, the stolen jewelry, Robert's betrayal. He made detailed notes, asking precise questions that showed his experience in these types of cases. Do you have the original property documents? He asked, looking over his glasses. Yes, all of them. The house is 100% in my name. I paid every cent for the construction, and I have all the receipts from the last 20 years. The doctor who supposedly signed the dementia report, has he ever examined you? Never in my life. I don't even know his name. Excellent. This is falsification of medical documents, a federal offense. Do you have any documentation for the stolen jewelry? Yes. Some of it, especially my late husband's watch, is insured for $3,000. Thomas smiled. Mrs. Vance, your case is solid, very solid. We have property invasion, theft, document forgery, attempted property fraud, and possibly medical corruption. Your family has gotten themselves into big trouble. What can we do? Several things. First, tomorrow we are going to file an eviction lawsuit for illegal invasion. Second, we will report the theft of your jewelry to the police. Third, we will report the falsification of medical documents to the medical board and the district attorney's office. And fourth, we will request a restraining order to prevent them from continuing to use your name fraudulently. How long will all this take? The eviction can be immediate if the judge sees clear evidence of invasion. In cases like this, where the invaders have no legal right to the property, the law acts quickly. How much will it cost? My fee is $5,000 for the entire process. Can you pay it? I can pay it today if you like. His smile widened. I like working with clients who take their legal defense seriously. Mrs. Vance, your family thought you were a helpless little old lady, but they were mistaken. You are a prepared woman. I've been preparing to defend myself from the world for 70 years, counselor. I'm not going to stop now. Excellent attitude. One important question. Are you willing to go all the way with this? Because when we start this process, your relationship with your son will likely be irreparable. I was silent for a moment, thinking of Robert, of the boy he had been, of the man he could have been, of the coward he had become. Counselor, my son betrayed me for money, declared me mentally incompetent for money, and publicly humiliated me for money. If our relationship can be broken so easily over money, then it was never a real relationship to begin with. Thomas nodded with respect. Understood. We will proceed with everything. First thing in the morning we will file all actions. There's something else. I want them to understand that they completely underestimated their opponent. I want them to learn that the consequences of betraying family are real and permanent. What do you have in mind? I want this process to be public. I want all their friends, neighbors, and acquaintances to know exactly what they did. I want the social cost of their betrayal to be as high as the legal cost. That can be arranged. Court records are public, and we can make sure the local media hears about such a scandalous case. I left that office feeling completely different. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the betrayed and humiliated mother. Now I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who was fighting back with every legal weapon at her disposal. That night, from my hotel room, I called my sister Laura in Phoenix. I told her the whole story. Eleanor, I can't believe Robert would do that after everything you sacrificed for him. It no longer matters what I sacrificed, Laura. What matters is what I'm going to get back. I hung up the phone and sat on the bed, looking towards my house. From the hotel window, I could see the lights on, the music still playing, the celebration continuing as if nothing had happened. Tomorrow would be a very different day for all of them. On Tuesday, at 8 in the morning, Thomas Grant arrived at my house with 3 legal documents, a police officer, and a notary public. I arrived at the exact same time in a taxi, dressed in my best gray suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence. Jessica's family was having breakfast on my terrace when they saw the legal caravan park in the garage. I saw Jessica drop her coffee cup when she recognized the official plates of the police cruiser. "Good morning," Thomas said in a professional and loud voice. "I am attorney Thomas Grant, legal representative of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the rightful owner of this property. We have come to deliver an immediate eviction order for illegal invasion." Jessica ran off the terrace with a look of panic on her face that I will never forget. Veronica appeared right behind her, recording everything with her cell phone as if it were another episode for her social media. Jessica's mother, who was wearing one of my robes, looked confused and scared. The officer presented the eviction order and began to list the violations: invasion of private property, destruction of personal property, theft of valuable items. As he spoke, I watched the face of each of them, the shock, the disbelief, the growing fear that their actions would have real consequences. "You have exactly 2 hours to collect your personal belongings and leave the property," the officer announced. "Any item belonging to Mrs. Vance must remain here. I will supervise the process to ensure that you do not take anything that does not belong to you." 2 hours? Veronica shouted. "This is impossible. We have children here." "You should have thought of that before invading someone else's property," the notary replied with professional calm. At that moment, Robert arrived, driving at high speed. He got out of the car with an expression of total desperation. Surely someone had told him about the police arriving. "What's going on here?" he asked, almost out of breath. "Your wife and her family are being legally evicted from your mother's property for illegal invasion," Thomas explained. "And you are being subpoenaed as an accomplice in a case of attempted property fraud." "Property fraud?" I showed him the documents. "The property transfer papers you were going to sign to steal my house, Robert. The papers your wife had hidden in my secret closet." Robert turned pale. I looked him in the eyes, searching for some trace of the sun I raised, but I only found the gaze of a stranger, a man who had chosen to betray his own mother for money. "Mom, I can explain," he said in a trembling voice. "There's nothing left to explain. You've already made your decision." Jessica approached Robert and whispered something in his ear. He shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. "What is your wife telling you, Robert?" I asked. "Does she want you to tell the police that you have mental problems? That you make things up?" Those words hurt me more deeply than any insult Jessica had uttered. Even in the face of the evidence, in the face of the law, in the face of everything that was happening, they were still trying to label me as mentally incompetent. "Mr. Robert Vance," Thomas intervened, "here is your official subpoena. You have 3 days to appear in family court to answer to the accusations of complicity in attempted property fraud against a senior citizen." "Complicity? But I'm her son. She can't sue her own son." "Mr. Vance," the officer said, "the law makes no exceptions for kinship when it comes to fraud and theft. A crime is a crime, no matter who commits it." The next 2 hours were a spectacle of chaos and humiliation for Jessica's family. From the terrace of my recovered home, I watched as the invasion they had planned so carefully completely unraveled. Jessica's mother was the first to break. After half an hour of crying and shouting, she sat on the stairs and refused to help with the packing. "This is your fault, Jessica," she screamed at her daughter. You told me everything was taken care of. You told me the little old lady had agreed to everything. Mom, shut up and help me pack, Jessica responded, desperately stuffing clothes into plastic bags. The children ran through the house crying and screaming, not understanding why they had to leave the paradise where they had been playing. A boy of about 8 came up to me, with red, confused eyes. Ma'am, why are you kicking us out? We didn't do anything wrong. My heart broke a little. The children were innocent in all this, pawns in their parents' scheme. I'm not kicking you out because you did something wrong, I explained in a soft voice. I'm asking you to leave because this is my house, and your family came here without asking my permission. But my mom said it was our house now. Your mom was mistaken. Jessica heard our conversation and came over, furious. Don't talk to my children. You have no right to confuse them even more. I'm not confusing them. You confused them by bringing them to a house that wasn't yours. This house is ours. Robert is your son. Children inherit from their parents. Children inherit when their parents die, not when their parents are still alive and well. You're already old. What do you need such a big house for at your age? Thomas intervened immediately. Ma'am, every comment you make about my client's age is being documented as additional evidence of age discrimination and psychological abuse against a senior citizen. Jessica fell silent instantly, her face red with anger. Robert had been carrying suitcases to the cars in complete silence, avoiding my gaze. When there were only 30 minutes left, he finally approached. Mom, we need to talk. There's nothing left to talk about, Robert. Look, I admit things got out of hand, but we can fix this. We can reach a family agreement without involving lawyers and police. What kind of agreement? You keep the house, of course. We accept that it was a mistake to come without telling you, and in return, you drop all the actions. And the jewelry? We'll return everything that was taken by mistake. By mistake? Do you really think I'm going to accept that stealing my mother's jewelry was a mistake? Mom, it wasn't theft, it was a misunderstanding. And the fake medical report was also a misunderstanding? And the request for property transfer due to mental incapacity? And publicly humiliating me by calling me a parasite? He remained silent, unable to find excuses for so many betrayals. It wasn't me, it was Jessica, he finally muttered. But you were there. You saw me being humiliated by your wife in my own house, and you said nothing. I didn't know what to say. You knew exactly what to say, Robert. You knew you had to defend your mother, but you chose to remain silent so as not to upset your wife. He became desperate, trying to find an escape that no longer existed. Okay, Jessica behaved badly. I admit it. What more do you want me to say? I want you to tell me the truth. I want you to admit that you planned to steal my house using false documents. I want you to admit that you betrayed me for money. I didn't betray you for money. I did it for my family. And what am I, Robert? Am I not your family? Yes, you are my family. But Jessica and the children are my main responsibility now. So your main responsibility now is to steal from your mother. Robert put his hands on his head in frustration. Mom, you don't understand. We have huge expenses. The kids need private schools, clothes, vacations. Jessica's house needs repairs. I work day and night, but the money is never enough. And that's why you decided that I had to pay your bills with my life's work? You live alone in a small apartment. You don't need such a big beach house. It's a waste. There it was. The truth had finally emerged. Robert hadn't betrayed me out of love for his family. He had betrayed me because he thought I didn't deserve what I had worked my whole life to achieve. A waste. I repeated the word slowly, feeling its weight on my tongue. Mom, I didn't mean it in a bad way. My 30 years of working day and night are a waste. My discipline of saving every penny to build this house is a waste. My sacrifice of raising you alone after I was widowed is a waste. That's enough, Robert exploded. It's always the same with you, always reminding me of everything you sacrificed, always making me feel guilty for having my own life. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jessica stopped packing to listen. There's the truth, I said with a calm that surprised me. You didn't betray me for money. You betrayed me because my sacrifices for you became a psychological burden you couldn't bear. I didn't say that. You didn't have to say it. You just screamed it. Robert stood there, breathing heavily, his face red with shame and anger. You know what the saddest thing about all this is, son? If you had asked me for help directly, I would have helped you. If you had told me you were having financial problems, we would have found a solution together. But you preferred to conspire behind my back, humiliate me publicly, and try to rob me using the law. Why? Because I knew you would say no. How did you know if you never asked me? Because you've always been very attached to your money, very controlling with your life's work. Controlling? Robert, I paid for your college. I bought your first car. I lent you the money for the down payment on your house. I helped you financially dozens of times in your adult life. Yes, but always with conditions, always reminding me that it was your money, that it was your sacrifice. I finally understood everything. Robert hadn't betrayed me out of greed. He had betrayed me out of pride. His manly pride couldn't stand to continue being financially dependent on his old mother. You know something, Robert? You're right. I should have forced you to be more independent when you were younger. I should have let you solve your own problems instead of always rescuing you. But it's too late to change the past. And now you will have the chance to be completely independent because, from now on, you will solve all your financial problems without my help. Thomas looked at his watch. Ladies and gentlemen, you have 10 minutes left. The final outburst was chaotic. Jessica screaming orders, the children crying, Robert carrying the last suitcases with an expression of total defeat. When they were finally all in their cars, Jessica rolled down her window and shouted one last threat. This isn't over, you bitter old woman. We're going to appeal. We're going to prove that you're crazy. Go ahead, I replied calmly. My lawyer will be waiting for you. The cars drove away, kicking up dust in my garage. Robert was the last to leave. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, but I had already turned my back on him. Thomas approached. How are you feeling, Mrs. Vance? Tired, I answered honestly. But free. Free from having to pretend we're a happy family. Free from having to excuse betrayal with motherly love. Free from pretending this can be fixed with forgiveness and forgetting. The officer said goodbye. The notary finished his documents. Thomas handed me the keys to my own house, his Mrs. Vance. Your house has been officially recovered. I walked up the steps of my terrace and sat in my favorite chair. For the first time in a week, I was alone in my own home, but the final act of this play was yet to come. That afternoon, I hired a professional cleaning service to erase all traces of the invasion. I paid $700 for 5 women to work all day, scrubbing every surface, washing every stain, rearranging every piece of furniture. While they cleaned, I walked through the house cataloging the damage. In the living room, my beautiful embroidered cushions had been stained with red wine. In the master bathroom, I discovered that someone had spilled hair dye in the porcelain bathtub, leaving black stains that refused to come out even with strong products. In the kitchen, 2 of my French skillets were burned beyond repair. And in my garden, half of my plants had been trampled to death. But the worst of all were the personal items that disappeared forever. In addition to the jewelry, I noticed that my family photo album was gone. The one with Robert's childhood photos. My photos with my late husband. Memories of decades of a life built with love and dedication. The wall clock my father gave me when I got married was also gone, an object of no great financial value, but of immense sentimental value. A week after the eviction, my house had regained its original peace. The strange smells were gone. The stains were gone. My furniture was back in its proper place, but I knew that some things would never go back to normal. Betrayal leaves invisible scars that time cannot completely erase. It was that Friday that Thomas called me with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Mrs. Vance, I have some important updates. The doctor who signed the false dementia report has been suspended by the medical board. The investigation revealed that he had signed at least 12 similar reports in exchange for money. I was silent, absorbing the information. How many other families had tried to dispossess their elderly relatives using the services of that corrupt doctor? And the legal consequences for Robert and Jessica? I asked. That's the best part. The prosecutor has decided to proceed with criminal charges for property fraud and conspiracy. It's no longer just a civil matter. It's a criminal case now. What does that mean exactly? It means they could face prison time if found guilty. And it also means that all the legal fees they've had to pay have been enormous. I didn't feel joy at this news, just a deep sense of justice being done. I didn't want to see my son in jail, but I couldn't allow him to escape the consequences of his actions either. That same afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was Veronica, Jessica's sister, crying on the phone. "Eleanor, please, we need to talk." Jessica is desperate. Robert has already spent over $15,000 on lawyers, and the legal proceedings aren't even over yet. And what does that have to do with me? We want to apologize. We want to fix things. Do you want to fix things? Or do you need me to drop the charges because you're running out of money? Ma'am, please. Jessica has children to support. Robert could lose his job if this becomes public in his office. She should have thought about the children before she planned to rob me, and Robert should have thought about his job before he falsified medical documents. But you already got your house back. You've already won. Why keep punishing us? Because getting my house back doesn't erase the humiliation. It doesn't return the stolen jewelry. It doesn't undo the psychological damage of being betrayed by my own son. We can return the jewelry. It's at my mom's house. The jewelry that was taken by mistake? The jewelry that you accidentally stole during the confusion of the move? Ma'am, please. Veronica, tell your sister that if she wants to talk to me, she can come here personally and bring all the stolen jewelry. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. The satisfaction came from seeing how the tank they had designed to destroy me was completely falling apart. The sadness came from knowing that my relationship with Robert was probably over forever. 2 days later, Jessica showed up at my door. She came alone, without Robert, with a bag in her hand and her eyes swollen from crying. "Eleanor, I came to return your things and to apologize." I let her in. She sat in my living room like a scolded child, placed the bag on the table, and began to take out my jewelry one by one. "Here are the pearl earrings. Here is the gold watch. Here are the silver coins. And here is the necklace that that we also took by mistake." "By mistake," I repeated, letting the sarcasm be evident in my voice. "Ma'am, the truth is, I took them, but it wasn't to steal them, it was to sell them. We needed the money urgently. We have a lot of debts. Robert lost money in some bad investments last year. We're behind on our mortgage. Our credit cards are maxed out, and the kids need school. And that's why you decided to rob me?" Jessica began to cry. Not those fake, manipulative tears I had seen before, but a genuine cry from someone who finally understood the gravity of her actions. "Eleanor, I admit I behaved badly, very badly. But I was desperate when Robert told me you had this beautiful house and you hardly ever used it. I thought. You thought you could take it from me without asking? I never wanted to take it from you. I just wanted to use it while you weren't here. And then, when we saw how expensive it was to maintain 2 houses, we thought maybe it would be better if the house was officially Robert's to avoid legal problems in the future." Legal problems. You created the legal problems by falsifying medical documents. That was the idea of that cheap lawyer we consulted. He told us it was the fastest way to transfer property within the family. I was silent for a moment, processing the level of ignorance and naivety they had shown. They had ruined their lives financially and legally because they followed the advice of a corrupt, second-rate lawyer. "Where is Robert?" I asked. He didn't want to come. He says you're not his mother anymore." Those words hurt more than I expected, but they also confirmed that I had made the right decision. He says I'm not his mother anymore? Yes. He says a real mother wouldn't sue her own son, that you chose money over family. And what do you think, Jessica? I think we started all this, but I also think you went too far. We could have resolved everything as a family without lawyers or police. How could we have resolved it as a family if you never told me the truth? If you lied to me, deceived me, and planned to rob me behind my back? But we're family. Families forgive. Families respect each other, Jessica. And you disrespected me in every possible way. Jessica got up to leave. So there's no way to fix this. The way to fix this was to not have done it in the first place. After she left, I sat on my terrace, watching the sunset over the sea. The waves crashed against the shore with their eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding on the land. A week later, Thomas called me with the final news. Mrs. Vance, Robert, and Jessica have accepted a plea bargain. They will pay a fine of $25,000. They will each do 200 hours of community service and will be on probation for 2 years. No prison time? No, but they will have a permanent criminal record, and the false medical report has been officially nullified. Your mental capacity is completely cleared legally. And the legal fees? They've already spent over $30,000 on defense attorneys. Between the fines and the legal fees, it cost them over $50,000 to try to steal your house. $50,000. Almost half the value of my house when I built it. They had lost more money trying to rob me than they could have gained if they had succeeded. A month after the eviction, I decided to do something I had never done. I hired a part-time housekeeper to look after the house when I wasn't there. Not because I couldn't do it myself, but because I wanted to make sure no one could ever invade it again without my knowledge. Maria was a middle-aged woman who lived near the beach and needed the work. She would look after the house 3 times a week, keeping everything clean and safe. I also changed all the locks, installed security cameras, and updated my will to leave the house to charitable institutions instead of to Robert. If he wanted total financial independence, he would have it. One Sunday afternoon, while rearranging some things in the master bedroom, I found an old photo that had fallen behind the dresser. It was Robert at 8 years old, sitting on the beach where years later I would build this house. His childish face was smiling at the camera, showing missing teeth, his eyes shining with pure happiness. I was next to him, younger, with black hair without a single gray strand, holding him by the shoulders with pride. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness so sharp that I had to sit on the edge of the bed. How had we gotten to this point? How had that smiling boy transformed into a man capable of betraying his own mother? Where did I go wrong? Perhaps Robert was right about one thing. Maybe I had been too controlling with my money, constantly reminding him of my sacrifices. Maybe I should have found a better balance between helping him and letting him learn to be independent. But did that justify the betrayal? Did it justify falsifying medical documents? Did it justify trying to rob me? No, nothing justified that. Our mistakes as parents can explain some things, but they do not absolve our children of their moral responsibility as adults. Robert was no longer that 8-year-old boy. He was a 45-year-old man who made conscious decisions and now needed to live with the consequences. I put the photo in a drawer. Those memories belonged to the past, and I needed to look to the future. 6 months later, I received a letter from Robert. A letter, not a call. He didn't even have the courage to speak to me directly. "Mom, I hope you are well. The kids ask about you. Jessica and I have learned our lesson. Maybe someday we can be a family again." I didn't answer the letter. Real families don't betray each other for money. Real families don't humiliate their elders. Real families don't plan robberies using false documents. Robert had decided that money was more important than his mother. I had decided that my dignity was more important than automatic forgiveness. The following spring, I decided to spend a whole month at the beach house. It was the first time I had stayed there for so long since the incident. I invited my sister Laura to spend 2 weeks with me. Together, we planted new flowers in the garden, cooked dishes from our childhood, and talked for hours on the porch, watching the sea. "Do you miss him?" Laura asked me one night as we drank tea. Every day, I answered honestly. But I miss the son I thought I had, not the man he proved to be. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that nothing happened. It means accepting what happened and moving on. And for now, moving on means keeping my distance. On my 71st birthday, I received a card from Veronica. Inside was a picture of the children and a note saying they missed me. I was surprised. Of all people, I would never expect a gesture of kindness from her. Maybe she had also learned a lesson from all this. I sent gifts to the children for Christmas, but not to Robert or Jessica. The children were not to blame for their parents' actions. They deserved to know that they still had a grandmother who loved them, even from afar. I started attending a support group for senior citizens in Chicago. There I discovered that my story, unfortunately, was not unique. Many other seniors had faced similar situations with their families. Some had lost everything because they didn't have the courage or the resources to fight back. Others, like me, had found the strength to defend what was rightfully theirs. A woman named Dolores told me that her son had sold her house while she was in the hospital, claiming that she would not be coming home. When she recovered, she discovered she had nowhere to live. Another woman, Carmen, said that her 3 children had emptied her bank accounts while she was battling cancer, leaving her with no money for treatments. Their stories made me realize that what happened to me was not just an isolated family drama. It was part of a larger social problem, the lack of respect for and exploitation of the elderly, often by their own families. I decided to use my experience to help others in the same situation. I started giving talks about the rights of senior citizens at community centers. I shared my story and taught others how to protect themselves legally. I also became a volunteer on a support hotline for elderly victims of family abuse. Every time I managed to help someone defend their rights, I felt that the pain I went through gained a new meaning. A year after the incident, I learned from Laura that Robert and Jessica had divorced. Apparently, the financial pressure and social scandal had been too much for their marriage. I didn't feel joy at the news, only a deep sadness for all the lives that had been affected by such wrong choices. One Saturday afternoon, while watering the plants in the garden of my beach house, an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. It was Robert, alone. He got out of the car slowly, as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. "Mom," he said simply, standing a few feet away. I looked at him without saying anything. His face was thinner, with new wrinkles around his eyes. He seemed to have aged 10 years in just one. "I came to ask for forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "Not because I need money or help, not because I want anything from you, but because I finally understand what I did." I continued in silence, letting him speak. "I betrayed you in the worst possible way. I let my own mother be humiliated and nearly robbed. I signed false papers. I stayed silent when I should have defended you. There are no excuses for what I did." He took a step forward but maintained a respectful distance. "I don't expect you to forgive me now, or maybe ever. I just wanted you to know that I am deeply sorry and that I completely understand why you did what you did. You were right. You were always right." I looked at the man in front of me. No longer the boy I raised, no longer the son who betrayed me, but a stranger trying to find his way back. "Thank you for coming, Robert," I finally said. "Forgiveness takes time." He nodded, accepting my response not as a rejection, but as a possibility. In the following months, I began to allow the children to visit me occasionally. Their faces lit up the house with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. I taught them how to make cookies in my kitchen. I told them stories about their father when he was little. I showed them how to take care of the garden. They never mentioned the incident. They had probably been instructed not to talk about it. But sometimes I caught the eldest, Sophia, looking at me with a curious expression, as if she were trying to piece together a story she only knew in part. One Sunday morning, as we were planting new tomato seedlings, Sophia asked me an unexpected question. "Grandma, why did you and Dad fight so badly?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. She was only 11, but her eyes showed an understanding beyond her years. "Sometimes, Sophia, adults make very big mistakes. Your father and your mother made some mistakes with me, and it hurt me very much." "What kind of mistakes?" I thought carefully about how to answer. I didn't want to poison her relationship with her parents, but I didn't want to lie either. They tried to take something that was mine without asking permission. Something that was very important to me. "This house?" "Yes, this house." She continued digging a small hole for the tomato seedling, processing the information. "Mom says you were very cruel to them. I made them face the consequences of their mistakes. Some might see that as cruelty. I see it as justice." Sophia planted the seedling carefully, pressing the earth around it with her small hands. "I think I understand," she finally said. "It's like when I take my sister's things without asking, and she tells Mom. I get mad at her for telling, but it's really my fault for taking her things." I smiled, amazed by the simplicity and depth of her understanding. "Exactly like that, dear, exactly like that." That night, after the children had gone, I sat on the terrace contemplating the sunset over the sea. I thought about how things had changed over the last 2 years. I thought about the betrayal, the pain, the fight, the victory, and finally, the slow rebuilding that was happening. Forgiveness didn't come all at once, like a great revelation or a dramatic moment. It came little by little, in small moments of connection, in honest conversations, in shared silences. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness that erases the past or pretends that nothing happened. It was a forgiveness that acknowledged the wound but chose not to let it define the future. Robert would never be the perfect son I had imagined. I would never be the perfect mother he might have wished for. We were two imperfect people, bound by blood and decades of shared history, trying to find a new path through the ruins of the old one. At 72, I learned that life rarely follows the script we plan. The people we love disappoint us. Trust is broken. Dreams fall apart. But I also learned that our ability to rebuild from the ashes is much greater than we imagine. My beach house remains a symbol of that truth. It was built with determination when everyone told me a widowed seamstress couldn't achieve such a dream. It was defended with courage when those who should have protected it tried to take it. And now it becomes a place of healing where old wounds slowly begin to scar over. Eleanor Vance, the little old lady they thought they could easily fool, proved to be the strongest of all. Not because she never fell, but because she always found the strength to get back up. Not because she never felt fear, but because she acted in spite of it. Not because she was never hurt, but because she did not allow her wounds to define her. This is my story. A story of betrayal and loss, yes, but also of dignity and strength. A story that I hope inspires other seniors to defend what is rightfully theirs. A story that reminds everyone that age does not make us fragile or expendable, but wise and resilient. And the house? The house I built with so much love and sacrifice still stands, strong and proud on the coast of Malibu, its terrace facing the infinite ocean, just like me. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revenge like you've never seen before. My son Julian cut off my access to the bank account and expected me to come crawling back on my knees begging for help. A month passed, and I did not call even once. When he finally drove over to my place and saw whose car was parked in front of the gate, his legs began to tremble. But let me tell you how this all started. I was standing in line at the grocery store with a full cart. I had chosen every product with care, calculating the prices as I always did, because even though there was money in that account, I never stopped being the woman who learned how to stretch every single dollar. I scanned the vegetables, the chicken, the laundry detergent, the medicine for my blood pressure. The cashier smiled and stated the total, $143.20. I swiped my card through the reader. I waited. The machine emitted a dry, buzzing sound. Declined. The cashier frowned. I tried again. Declined again. I felt the blood rushing to my face. The people behind me started shifting restlessly. Someone sighed with impatience. The cashier looked at me with that mixture of pity and annoyance that I will never forget. I had to leave the cart there, full, and walk out with empty hands and my head down. I arrived home shaking, not from the cold, but from a humiliation that burned me from the inside out. I tried to log into the banking app on my phone. Incorrect username or password. I called the bank. The automated voice asked me to verify my identity. After 10 minutes of waiting on hold, a young woman explained to me with a professional and distant voice that my access to the account had been modified. Only the primary account holder could make changes now. Julian, my son Julian, who had insisted 2 years ago that we put everything in his name to make things easier, so that I would not have to worry about anything. How foolish I was. How blind, how naive to believe that my own son, the creature I carried in my womb, whom I nursed, whom I raised alone after his father abandoned us, would ever do something like this to me. I hung up the call and sat on the armchair in the living room, that same armchair where Julian sat as a child to watch cartoons while I came home from my second job with swollen feet. I looked around. The walls of this small apartment, which I paid for with years of housekeeping, with double shifts at the diner, with every coin I saved by denying myself everything that was not strictly necessary, all so that he could study, all so that he could have what I never had. And now I was there, without access to my own money, without being able to buy my own food, without being able to pay for my own medication. I picked up the phone. I looked for his number. My finger hovered over the screen. I almost dialed. I almost called him to ask what had happened, to beg him to explain, to plead with him to fix the error. But something inside me, something small but firm like a stone, stopped me, because it was not an error. I knew it in that instant, with a clarity that pierced my chest. Julian knew exactly what he was doing. He had cut off my access, expecting me to run to him, desperate, humiliated, begging for his help, expecting to see me on my knees, expecting to have that power over me, over his own mother. I put the phone away. I was not going to give him that satisfaction. Not yet. Maybe never. I got up from the armchair and walked to the kitchen. I opened the pantry. There was rice, beans, a little oil, salt. I could survive a few days on that. I had survived worse things. I had survived the abandonment of his father. I had survived the poverty that forced me to wash other people's clothes until my hands bled. I had survived sleepless nights, sewing uniforms to earn a few extra dollars. I had survived everything. And I would survive this too. That night I could not sleep. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, feeling my mind replay every moment of the last few months. The signs had been there. I simply did not want to see them. The visits that became more and more spaced out, the calls that became shorter, colder, the way Julian averted his gaze when I spoke, the way his wife, that woman who never looked at me with true affection, smiled smugly every time she saw me. The forgotten birthdays, the broken promises, the Mother's Day that passed without a single word from him. I remembered the last time I went to his house, 3 months ago. I had baked his favorite cake, that chocolate one I made when he was a child that always brought a smile to his face. I rang the doorbell. His wife opened the door with an annoyed expression. She told me they were busy, that I should have called ahead, that it was not a good time. I saw Julian behind her in the spacious living room of that house that I helped pay for when he was starting out. He did not get up. He did not come to greet me. He only raised his hand in a vague gesture and went back to looking at his phone. I stood there on the threshold, holding that cake like an idiot, feeling the rejection hit me in the chest. I murmured an apology and left. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus stop with the cake in my hands and tears stinging my eyes. But even then, even after that humiliation, I had found excuses. They are stressed. They have a lot of responsibilities. Life is hard for them too. What stupidity! What tremendous stupidity of mine to justify the unjustifiable, to swallow the pain and call it love, to accept crumbs and call them enough. Now, lying in my bed in the dark, I understood the truth. Julian had not cut off my access to the account by mistake or by carelessness. He had done it because he wanted control, because he wanted to see me weak, because at some point in his life, my son, my boy, had become someone capable of punishing his own mother for the simple fact of existing. I closed my eyes and an image appeared in my mind. Julian at 7 years old, crying because the kids at school made fun of his torn shoes. Me, kneeling in front of him, drying his tears and promising him that he would soon have new shoes. I worked 3 straight shifts that week. I cleaned bathrooms, floors, windows. I came home every night with my body destroyed. But on Friday, I put a pair of new shoes on his bed. He jumped with joy. He hugged me. He told me I was the best mom in the world. That boy no longer existed. The man he had become was a stranger, a cruel stranger. The following days were a parade of memories that I had buried under layers of excuses and blind hope. Every time I closed my eyes, a different scene appeared, one more piece of the puzzle that I had refused to put together. I remembered Christmas last year. I had saved for months to buy Julian that watch he wanted so much, an elegant watch, one of those that important businessmen wear. It cost me $300. $300 that meant skipping meals, walking instead of taking the bus, not buying the coat I needed for the winter. I wrapped it with the prettiest paper I found. I arrived at his house on the afternoon of December 24th, with the gift in my hands and a nervous smile on my face. His wife opened the door. She looked me up and down with that barely disguised contempt that was already familiar to me. She let me in, but she did not invite me to sit down. I remained standing in the entryway while she shouted toward the second floor that I had arrived. Julian came down the stairs reluctantly, as if my presence were an inconvenience in his perfect day. I gave him the gift. He opened it without looking me in the eyes. When he saw the watch, he barely murmured a dry thank you. His wife leaned in and said they already had 3 identical watches in the drawer. They laughed. Both of them laughed. Julian did not even bother to pretend he liked it. He told me they had plans, that I should go. He did not offer me anything to drink. He did not ask me how I had gotten there. He did not wish me a Merry Christmas. I left that house with my heart broken in pieces, but even so, I told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that maybe they really were busy, that maybe I expected too much. Lies. Everything was lies, I told myself, to avoid facing the truth. I also remembered my 63rd birthday. I waited all day for a call, a single call. I kept the phone close to me every second. I checked it every 5 minutes in case I had missed a notification. The call never came. But that night, while I browsed aimlessly through social media to distract myself from the loneliness, I saw the photos. Julian and his wife at a fancy restaurant, smiling, toasting with glasses of wine. The caption said, "Celebrating life and blessings." It was my birthday, and he was celebrating without remembering me. The comments under the photos were from friends congratulating them, asking what they were celebrating. No one mentioned my name. No one knew that it was my birthday that day, because to Julian, I no longer existed. I stared at those photos for hours. My son looked so happy, so free, so relieved not to have to pretend he remembered me. I turned off the phone and cried in the darkness of my room until I ran out of tears. I remembered the day I got sick. It was 6 months ago. A bad flu that left me in bed with a high fever and without strength even to get up for water. I called Julian. It rang 5 times before he answered. His voice sounded annoyed. "Busy, Mom. I'm in an important meeting." I explained to him that I felt very bad, that I could not even get up. There was a long silence. Then he told me to drink hot tea and rest. That was all. He did not come to see me. He did not call back to know how I was doing. He did not send even a text message. It was 5 days of fever. 5 days in which my neighbor, Margaret, a woman I barely knew, was the one who knocked on my door every morning with a thermos of hot soup and medicines she bought with her own money. She, who owed me nothing. She, who had no obligation to me, while my own son did not lift a finger. When I finally recovered and called him to tell him I was better, he responded with a distracted, "That's good, Mom," as if he were talking about the weather, as if I were a distant acquaintance and not the woman who brought him into the world. I remembered the times I asked him for help with simple things. A jar I couldn't open, a light bulb that needed changing on the high ceiling, a heavy piece of furniture that had to be moved. He always had an excuse. He was always busy. It was always tomorrow. "Mom, I can't today." That tomorrow never came. But when he needed money for the down payment on his house, I did not hesitate for a second. I gave him my savings, $12,000 that I had saved for my old age, for emergencies, to feel safe. I gave them to him without thinking twice because he was my son, because I trusted him, because he promised me he would pay them back in 6 months. 3 years have passed. I haven't seen a single dollar back, and now I understood why. Julian never had any intention of paying me back. He knew that I would never claim them from him. He knew that he could take and take without giving anything in return. Because mothers forgive, because mothers forget, because mothers keep loving even when they are treated like garbage. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea in my hands. I looked at the walls of this apartment full of memories. Photos of Julian at every stage of his life, his first day of school, his graduation, his wedding. In all the photos I was there, always by his side, always smiling, always proud. But in real life, I had ceased to exist for him a long time ago. The truth hit me with brutal force. Julian had not forgotten me by accident. He was not too busy. It wasn't that life had him absorbed. He had decided to erase me. He had decided that I was a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past, an embarrassment he preferred to keep far from his new life of success and appearances. And I, like a fool, had allowed every slight. I had justified every rejection. I had swallowed every humiliation with a smile and an "it's okay, son, I understand." But no more. Something broke inside me that night. It wasn't my heart. That had been broken a long time ago. It was the invisible chain that tied me to the need for his approval, to the hope that someday he would go back to being the boy who hugged me and told me I was his favorite person in the world. That boy was dead, and I had to accept it. I got up from the table and walked to my room. I opened the drawer where I kept the old photos. There it was, a photograph of Julian at 5 years old, sitting on my lap, smiling with that toothless smile that melted my heart. I held it between my trembling fingers. A tear fell on the glossy paper. This boy loved me. This boy needed me. This boy saw me as his hero. But that boy no longer existed, and the man he turned into did not deserve even one more tear. I put the photo back in the drawer. I closed the drawer firmly, and I made a decision. I was not going to call him. I was not going to beg him. I was not going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. If Julian wanted to play this cruel game of power and control, let him play alone. I was no longer going to participate. The first week without calling him was the hardest of my life. Every morning I woke up with the impulse to grab the phone, to dial his number, to listen to his voice even if it was cold and distant, because even my son's rejection seemed better than this absolute silence that surrounded me. But every time my hand approached the phone, I remembered the humiliation at the supermarket. I remembered his laugh when he saw the watch I gave him. I remembered how he left me sick and alone for 5 days, without even asking if I was still alive. And then I would push the phone away and breathe deeply. The days dragged on, slow and heavy. I sat by the window watching the street. I saw mothers pass by with their children. I saw them laughing together. I saw them hugging. And I felt a pain so deep in my chest that sometimes it was hard to breathe. But I did not call. The rice and beans were running out. I counted what was left, maybe for 4 more days if I ate small portions. I opened my wallet. $22 in cash. That was all I had in the world. $22 and a son who expected to see me crawling back to him. I sat on the edge of my bed and let reality crash over me like a cold wave. I was alone, completely alone. At 64 years old, without money, without access to my account, without anyone to turn to. Fear settled in my stomach like a frozen stone. I could die here, and Julian wouldn't find out until someone reported the smell. I could get sick again, and there would be no one to knock on my door. I could scream, and no one would hear me. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a little girl. I cried for the mother I was. I cried for the sacrifices I made. I cried for the love I gave, and that was never enough. I cried for the woman who was now sitting on this bed, invisible and forgotten. But at some point, in the middle of that heartbreaking crying, something changed. The crying stopped. The tears dried up, and in their place appeared something different. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. Not the explosive rage that breaks things. Not the rage that screams and curses. It was a cold rage, silent, firm as steel. I got up from the bed. I looked at myself in the vanity mirror. I saw an older woman with a face swollen from crying and red eyes, but I also saw something else. I saw a woman who had survived things that would have destroyed others. I raised a son alone. I worked 3 jobs at the same time. I paid every bill. I kept a roof over our heads. I fed him even when I went without eating. I clothed him, even when I wore old and mended clothes. I built a human being from scratch. I gave him education, values, opportunities, and if I could do all that back then, when I was younger but also poorer and more scared, then I could survive this now. Julian was waiting for my desperate call. He was waiting for me to beg, to plead, to show him that without him I was nothing. But he was wrong. I washed my face with cold water. I combed my hair. I put on the only decent blouse I had left. And I went out to the street. I walked 4 blocks to my neighbor Margaret's house, the same woman who had taken care of me when I was sick. I knocked on her door with my heart beating hard in my chest. She opened it with a warm smile. She invited me in. She made me a coffee without me asking. She sat across from me in her small kitchen and waited for me to speak. I told her everything. I told her about the bank account. I told her about the grocery store. I told her about Julian and his cruel silence. I told her about the $22 I had left and the food that was running out. Margaret listened to me in silence. When I finished speaking, she took my hand in hers. She didn't tell me that Julian surely had his reasons. She didn't tell me that children sometimes get confused. She didn't tell me any of those empty phrases people say to fill the uncomfortable silence. Instead, she told me, "Eleanor, you don't need that boy. You are stronger than you think." Then she got up and came back with an envelope. Inside was $150. She told me it was a loan with no rush to repay, to buy food, to pay what I needed. That when I could pay her back, I would, but not to worry about that now. I tried to refuse it. It seemed like too much. It seemed like charity. It seemed humiliating to accept money from a neighbor when my own son had left me with nothing. But Margaret closed my fingers over the envelope and looked me in the eyes. "Accepting help isn't weakness, Eleanor. It's intelligence." I went back home with those $150 pressed against my chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the difference between eating and going hungry, between surviving and giving up. That night I slept a little better. The next day I went to the grocery store. I bought the basics. No luxuries. Rice, beans, eggs, bread, milk, cheap vegetables. I calculated every penny. I stretched every dollar as far as I could. When the cashier scanned my products and said the total, I took out the cash with trembling hands. I paid. I took my bags. And I walked out of there with my head held high. Small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The following days I established a routine. I got up early. I did gentle exercise at home to stay active. I cooked my meals with care. I cleaned the apartment even though no one would come to visit. Because if I stopped taking care of myself, if I gave up, then Julian would have won, and I wasn't going to allow it. One afternoon, while I was washing the dishes, I heard someone knocking on the door. My heart jumped. For a stupid second, I thought it might be Julian, that he had come to apologize, that he had come to his senses. I opened the door. It wasn't Julian. It was a man I didn't recognize at first. Tall, about 50 years old, well-dressed, but without showing off. He looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of surprise and something like relief. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" he asked with a soft voice. "Yes," I responded cautiously. "Who is asking?" The man smiled. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Caleb Bennett." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. He must have noticed my confusion because he continued speaking. "You helped me 15 years ago. I was a boy who had just arrived in the city. I had nowhere to sleep. I had no money. I was desperately looking for a job. You saw me sitting at the bus stop in the rain. You invited me into your house. You gave me food. You let me sleep on your sofa for 2 weeks until I got a job." The memories began to return. A young boy, thin, with frightened eyes and soaked clothes. I remembered him. I had given him a bowl of hot soup and a blanket. Julian was a teenager then and had complained about having a stranger in the house. But I told him that helping a neighbor wasn't optional. "Caleb," I murmured. "Yes, I remember you." He nodded. "Mrs. Eleanor, I never forgot what you did for me. You didn't know me at all. You had no reason to trust me, but you did. You treated me with dignity when the rest of the world looked at me like garbage." "It was nothing," I said, lowering my gaze. "Anyone would have done the same." "That's not true," he responded firmly. "No one else did. Only you." There was an uncomfortable silence. I didn't know what to say. Caleb continued. "I've been looking for you for months. I wanted to thank you personally. I wanted you to know that thanks to that opportunity you gave me, I was able to build a life. Now I have my own business. I'm doing well. Very well. I'm happy for you," I said sincerely. "But when I finally found you, I started asking some questions. And I found out things that worried me a lot, Mrs. Eleanor." My body tensed. "What things?" "I found out that your son cut off your access to your own accounts, that he left you without resources, that you are going through difficulties." I felt shame burning my cheeks. "That's none of your business," I murmured. "You're right," he said. It's not my business. But I have a debt to you, a debt I can never fully repay. So let me help you now. I don't need charity, I responded more harshly than I intended. It's not charity, Mrs. Eleanor. It's justice. Caleb Bennett didn't wait for my answer. He took a business card out of his wallet and extended it to me. It said, Caleb Bennett, financial advisor and legal consultant. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, I have an appointment with a lawyer friend of mine, he said calmly. I would like you to come with me. We need to review your financial situation. See what options you have. What rights correspond to you. I shook my head. I don't have money for lawyers. I'm not charging you anything, he responded. I'm doing this because I want to. Because I must. Because 15 years ago, you gave me something priceless. Dignity and hope. Now let me give you back even a fraction of that. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him I could do it alone. But the truth was that I couldn't. The truth was that I was desperate. And the truth was that maybe, just maybe, this was the sign I had been waiting for, without knowing it. Okay, I whispered finally. I'll go. Caleb smiled. I'll pick you up at 9:30. And, Mrs. Eleanor, this is going to get better, I promise you. He left before I could answer. I remained standing there in the doorway, holding his card between my fingers, feeling that something was changing. I didn't know exactly what, but something was moving in the shadows of my life. That night I almost didn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about what a lawyer could do, about what rights I could have, about whether there was any way to recover even something of what Julian had taken from me. At 9 in the morning, I was already dressed and ready. I put on my best dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I applied light makeup. I combed my hair with care. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted to look strong. Caleb arrived punctually in an elegant car. He opened the passenger door for me like a true gentleman. During the ride, he asked me basic things. How had I been these years? Was I still living in the same apartment? Did I need anything urgent? I told him the essentials. I didn't go into details about Julian. It still hurt too much to talk about that naturally. We arrived at a modern building downtown. We went up to the 5th floor. The office was spacious and bright. On the door it said, Arthur Richardson, family and estate attorney. A man of about 60, with gray hair and a kind look, received us with a warm smile. He shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Vance, it is a pleasure to meet you. Caleb has told me a little about your situation. Sit down, please. We are going to review everything calmly. I sat in a comfortable chair across from his desk. Caleb sat next to me. Arthur opened a notebook and took a pen. Tell me from the beginning, he said with a soft voice. What exactly happened with your bank account? I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told him how Julian had convinced me to put everything in his name, how he had promised me it was to make things easier, how I had trusted him blindly. I told him about the day at the supermarket, about the call to the bank, about the month I had spent without access to my own money. Arthur listened, taking notes. From time to time he asked specific questions. Since when was the account in Julian's name? Had I signed any documents? Was there any proof that I had contributed to that money? I explained that my late husband's widow's pension was deposited into that account, that I had also contributed my savings. That, technically, part of that money was legally mine. Arthur nodded slowly. This is financial abuse, he said with a firm voice, and potentially it is a crime. Your son cannot simply cut off your access to funds that legally belong to you, especially if your pension is deposited there. I felt something stir in my chest. You mean I can do something? Not only can you, Mrs. Vance, you must. This is a violation of your rights, and there are legal ways to recover what is yours. But he is my son, I murmured. I don't want to get him in trouble. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of compassion and firmness. Mrs. Vance, your son left you without money to eat. He left you without access to your medication. He put you in a situation of extreme vulnerability. He is already in trouble, trouble that he created himself. Tears began to well up in my eyes. I couldn't avoid it. All this was too much, too real, too painful. Caleb handed me a tissue. Arthur waited patiently for me to compose myself. What do I need to do? I asked finally, with a trembling voice. Arthur leaned back in his chair. First, we are going to request your bank records. We are going to prove that you have a legal right to those funds. Then we are going to send a formal letter to your son, demanding that he restore your access immediately. If he refuses, we will proceed legally. And if he says the money is his, that I have no right to anything, then we will go to court. And believe me, Mrs. Vance, judges do not look kindly on children who financially abuse their elderly parents, especially when there is clear evidence that you contributed to those funds. But that will take time, I said, feeling overwhelmed. And I need money now. To eat, to survive. Arthur looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded as if they had discussed this previously. We already thought of that, Caleb said. While the legal matters are resolved, I am going to help you with your basic expenses. It is not a loan. It is a gift, and I will not accept a no for an answer. I tried to protest, but Caleb raised his hand. Mrs. Eleanor, you gave me shelter and food when I had nothing. You treated me as if I were your own son. Let me do this, please. I didn't know what to say. The words got stuck in my throat. I could only nod while tears ran down my cheeks. Arthur continued explaining the process to me. The documents I would need, the steps to follow, everything sounded complicated, but he explained with patience, making sure I understood every detail. He also mentioned something that surprised me. Mrs. Vance, I need to ask you something important. Did you ever lend money to your son? $12,000 for the down payment on his house, specifically? How did you know that? I asked, astonished. I made some inquiries, Caleb responded. I spoke with some people who know you, and that information came to light. Yes, I lent him that money, I confirmed. 3 years ago. He promised to pay it back in 6 months. He never did. Do you have any document that proves that loan? A contract, a receipt, something? I shook my head, ashamed. No, I trusted his word. He was my son. Arthur sighed. That complicates things. Without written proof, it is difficult to recover that money. But we can try to include it in the general lawsuit. Sometimes, children confess these things when they are under legal pressure. We spent 2 more hours in that office. I signed documents authorizing Arthur to request my bank records. I signed a power of attorney letter so he could act on my behalf. I signed everything they put in front of me, because for the first time in weeks, I felt that someone was on my side. When we left the building, the sun was shining brightly. Caleb took me to lunch at a modest but cozy restaurant. He ordered for both of us without asking me what I wanted, as if he knew I was too emotionally exhausted to make decisions. We ate in silence for a while. Then Caleb spoke. Mrs. Eleanor, I know this is difficult. I know that confronting your son legally is probably the last thing you wanted to do in life. It is, I admitted. I never thought it would come to this. But you deserve respect. You deserve dignity. And you deserve to have access to your own money. What Julian did is not only cruel, it is illegal. I know, I whispered, but he is still my son. And you are still his mother. A mother who sacrificed everything for him. A mother who deserves something better than this. We finished eating. Caleb paid the bill despite my protests. Then he handed me an envelope. There are $2,000 in there, he said before I could speak. Use them for whatever you need. Food, medicine, bills, whatever. And don't worry about paying them back. When this is resolved and you recover your money, if you want to give me something, fine. If not, that's fine too. Caleb, this is too much, I said with a broken voice. Nothing is too much for the woman who saved my life, he responded firmly. He took me back home. Before I got out of the car, he gave me a phone number. It's my personal cell phone. Call me if you need anything. At any hour. I mean it. I entered my apartment with the envelope pressed against my chest. I closed the door. I leaned against it. And finally, after weeks of pain and fear, I felt something different. Hope. The following days were a whirlwind of activity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt useful. Busy. Alive in a way I had forgotten was possible. Arthur called me 3 days after our meeting. His voice sounded satisfied. Mrs. Vance, I have good news. I got the bank records for the last 5 years. And what do they say? I asked with a racing heart. They say you have a solid case. Your pension has been deposited into that account religiously every month. It is $1,200 a month for 5 years. That is $72,000 that entered that account and are legally yours. $72,000. The figure left me breathless. I had never thought of that money in that way. I had never added it up. I only knew that my pension arrived and that Julian supposedly used it to help me with my expenses. But now I realized that I barely saw any of that money. Julian gave me $200 a month when he remembered, sometimes less, sometimes nothing. Where was the rest of my money? That is the right question, said Arthur. The records show that Julian has been spending freely from that account. Expensive restaurants, trips, luxury purchases. There is a charge of $8,000 to a jewelry store 6 months ago, another of $15,000 to a travel agency a year ago. I felt the rage returning, cold, hard. Julian had been living well on my money while I counted pennies to buy rice. There is also something else, continued Arthur. I found evidence that you deposited your own savings into that account. $12,500 4 years ago. Money you had earned working before retiring? Yes, I said with a trembling voice. It was when Julian convinced me to merge everything into a single account so it would be easier to manage. He said that way he could help me better with my finances. What he did is called misappropriation of funds, Mrs. Vance, and we have all the evidence we need to prove it. What follows now? I asked. Now we send him a formal letter. A letter where we explain that we know exactly what he did, that he has 7 days to restore your full access to the account and to compensate you for the funds he spent improperly. If he doesn't respond or refuses, we proceed with a formal lawsuit. Do it, I said without hesitation. I was no longer afraid. I no longer had doubts. Julian had crossed a line from which there was no return. The letter was sent the next day by certified mail. Arthur told me that Julian would have to sign upon receiving it, so we would know exactly when he read it. Meanwhile, Caleb continued visiting me regularly. He brought food, he brought company, he brought stories of his life that made me laugh for the first time in months. He told me how, after I gave him shelter 15 years ago, he got a job at an accounting firm. He started from the bottom, cleaning the offices. But he was smart and observant. He learned. He studied at night. He got certifications. He moved up the ranks. Now he had his own financial consulting firm. He had employees. He had important clients. He had a life that seemed like it came out of a dream. And it all started because you gave me a chance, he told me one afternoon while we drank coffee in my small kitchen. Because you saw me as a human being when everyone else saw me as a problem. I only did the right thing, I responded, feeling uncomfortable with so much gratitude. Exactly, he said. You did the right thing. Now let me do the right thing too. A week later, Arthur called me with urgency in his voice. Mrs. Vance, Julian received the letter 3 days ago, and today he responded. What did he say? I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. He is furious. He sent a letter from his own lawyer saying that all the money in that account is legally his because the account is in his name, that you have no right to those funds, that if we insist on this, he will countersue for defamation. It is a common intimidation tactic, continued Arthur, but it is not going to work. We have the evidence. We have the records showing where that money came from, and we have the law on our side. So, what do we do? I asked. We proceed with the formal lawsuit. We go to court, and we are going to win. That night I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from something different, from the certainty that this was really happening, that I was really confronting my own son, that our relationship, what little remained of it, was about to break completely. But there was no turning back anymore, and, honestly, I didn't want to turn back anymore. Caleb appeared at my door the next day with something unexpected. A new cell phone, more modern than the old one I had. You need a better phone, he said, handing it to me. It's already set up. It already has my number and Arthur's. And I also bought an unlimited data plan so you can call and use the internet without worrying. I tried to refuse it, but he insisted. Besides, he said with a smile, I need you to be able to receive emails because I have something else for you. What is it? I asked, confused. I sat in front of my laptop that he had brought. Caleb opened several documents on the screen. I did a complete investigation of your financial situation, he explained. And I found something interesting. You worked for 25 years for a cleaning company, right? Yes, I confirmed. Until I retired 6 years ago. That company had a retirement fund for its employees. A fund to which you contributed automatically from your salary every month. It is a small amount, but over 25 years it accumulated. I knew nothing about that, I said, surprised. Most employees didn't know, Caleb responded. The company didn't make much effort to inform them, but I investigated. I spoke with them. And it turns out you have $8,500 in that fund that you never claimed. $8,500. Another number that seemed unreal. How is it possible they never told me? I asked. They sent a letter to your address when you retired. But according to their records, the letter was returned, probably because you had already moved to this apartment. Caleb took some forms out of his briefcase. You need to sign these documents to claim that money. The process takes approximately 3 weeks, but that money is yours. Legally, without dispute. I signed the papers with trembling hands. I couldn't believe what was happening. Money that I thought I didn't have. Money that was mine by right. Money that meant independence. But that's not all, continued Caleb. I also checked if you qualify for any assistance programs for seniors, and it turns out you do. There is a state program that can provide you with an additional $200 a month for medical expenses and food. How did I not know anything about this? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Why didn't anyone tell me, Mrs. Eleanor? Because probably Julian was never interested in finding out. He wanted you to depend on him, to need him, because that gave him power. The following days were of intense paperwork, signatures, forms, documents. Caleb helped me with everything. Arthur, too. Between the two of them, they were building a legal and financial shield around me. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel different. I began to feel powerful. 2 weeks later, I received an email on my new phone. It was from the cleaning company where I worked. They confirmed that my application had been approved. The $8,500 would be deposited into my new account. The account Caleb had helped me open at a different bank. An account where only I had access. I cried when I read that email. Not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude, from victory. Caleb called me that same afternoon. I have one more surprise for you, he said with a mysterious voice. I'm going to pick you up tomorrow at 10. Wear something nice. What surprise? I asked. You'll see, he responded and hung up. The next morning I got ready with care. I put on my best dress. I did my makeup. I did my hair. When Caleb arrived, he whistled with admiration. You look beautiful, Mrs. Eleanor. He took me to a car dealership. An elegant dealership with shiny and gleaming cars. He parked and looked at me with a smile. What are we doing here? I asked, confused. You need transportation, he said simply. And I need to buy a new car. So we are going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I don't understand. My current car is only 2 years old. It is in perfect condition. I don't need it anymore. So I am going to give it to you. Caleb, I can't accept a car, I protested. Of course you can, he responded. And you will, because you deserve to move with freedom. You deserve not to depend on buses or anyone. You deserve to have your own transportation. I tried to argue, but he was already getting out of the car. I followed him into the dealership. Half an hour later, we were signing the transfer papers. The car was now in my name. A beautiful car, silver-colored, with barely 30,000 miles on it. Caleb handed me the keys. It's yours, Mrs. Eleanor. Enjoy it. I stood in the parking lot of the dealership, holding those keys, looking at that car that was now mine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I felt that my life belonged to me again. Learning to drive that car was like learning to live again. It had been years since I sat behind a steering wheel. When my husband died, I sold our old car because I couldn't pay for the maintenance or the gas. Since then, it had been the bus, long walks, depending on the goodwill of others to get places. But now I had my own car, my own freedom on 4 wheels. Caleb accompanied me the first few times. He took me to an empty parking lot where I practiced for hours. Starting, braking, turning, parking. My hands trembled at first. I was afraid of crashing, of scratching the car, of making a mistake. But little by little, muscle memory returned. The movements became more natural. Confidence grew. A week later, I dared to drive alone for the first time. I only went to the grocery store that was 10 blocks from my house, but those 10 blocks felt like crossing a continent. I parked, did my shopping, returned to the car with my bags, and when I got home and turned off the engine, I sat in silence for several minutes, smiling like a fool. I had done it. Alone, without help, without depending on anyone. The days passed and I felt stronger and stronger. The money from the retirement fund had arrived in my account. $8,500 shining on my phone screen every time I checked the banking app. My money, in my account. Under my control. The approval for the state assistance program had also arrived. $200 additional every month. It wasn't much, but added to my pension that I would soon recover, it meant stability. It meant not having to count every penny with terror. Margaret, my neighbor, noticed the change in me. One day she invited me for tea at her house and looked at me with that wise smile that women who have lived a lot have. "You look different, Eleanor," she told me. "You look taller, stronger." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel as if I had been asleep for years and finally woke up." She nodded. "That is what happens when you stop living for others and start living for yourself." Her words stayed with me. She was right. For decades I had lived for Julian. My decisions, my sacrifices, my dreams, everything had revolved around him. And when he discarded me like garbage, I almost gave up. I almost accepted that without him I was nothing. But now I knew the truth. I had always been something, someone. A woman with self-worth. A woman who didn't need her son's validation to exist. Arthur called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have a date for the preliminary hearing," he announced. "It will be in 3 weeks. The judge will review the evidence from both sides and decide if there is merit to proceed to trial." "Will we be ready?" I asked, with a nervousness I couldn't hide. "More than ready," he responded with confidence. "We have bank documents, records of deposits, evidence of unauthorized expenses. We have a solid case, Mrs. Vance. Julian has no way to justify what he did." "And if the judge doesn't believe us?" I asked quietly. "He will believe us," said Arthur firmly. "The numbers don't lie, and judges do not tolerate financial abuse of the elderly. Believe me." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. In 3 weeks, I would see Julian face to face. In 3 weeks, I would have to look him in the eyes, knowing that I had taken him to court, knowing that our relationship, if anything was left of it, would be destroyed forever. Part of me still hurt. The part that was a mother. The part that remembered the boy who once hugged me and told me I was his hero. That part wanted to cry, wanted to give up, wanted to call him and say, "Let's forget all this." But the other part of me, the part that had grown and strengthened these last weeks, knew that I couldn't do it. I knew that Julian needed to face the consequences of his actions, and I knew that I deserved justice. I decided to prepare for that encounter. I didn't want to arrive at the courthouse feeling weak or scared. I wanted to arrive feeling powerful. I started taking better care of myself. I walked every morning in the nearby park. I bought nutritious food with the money I now had. I allowed myself small luxuries that I previously considered impossible. A coffee at the corner shop, a magazine, a haircut at a decent salon. I also started writing. I bought a notebook, and every night before sleeping, I wrote my thoughts. I wrote about the pain Julian had caused me, about the years of sacrifice he had forgotten, about the betrayal that still burned in my chest. But I also wrote about my rebirth, about Caleb and his unexpected loyalty, about Margaret and her generous friendship, about Arthur and his tireless defense, about all the people who had shown me that I did matter. Writing helped me sort out my emotions, to see clearly what had happened and what was happening, to mentally prepare for what was coming. A week before the hearing, Caleb came to visit me with a proposal. "Mrs. Eleanor, I know this is going to sound strange, but I want us to rehearse." "Rehearse what?" I asked, confused. "The day of the hearing. Arthur is going to ask you questions. Julian's lawyer, too." I want us to practice your answers, so you feel secure, so they don't catch you by surprise. We spent the whole afternoon rehearsing. Caleb played the role of the hostile lawyer, throwing difficult questions at me, trying to confuse me, to make me doubt. Isn't it true that you gave your son permission to manage that account as he wished? He asked with a hard voice. I gave him permission to help me manage it. I responded with a firm voice. I didn't give him permission to steal my money. How can you call it theft when the account is legally in his name? Because that money came from my pension, from my work, from my savings. The fact that the account is in his name doesn't change whose money that is. Over and over, we went over the possible questions. Over and over I practiced maintaining calm, maintaining firmness, not letting myself be intimidated. At the end of the afternoon, Caleb smiled. You are going to do very well, Mrs. Eleanor. You are going to surprise everyone in that room. 2 days before the hearing, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I took out the old photos of Julian, the ones I had kept in the drawer, the ones that showed the smiling boy he once was. I looked at them one by one. Julian at 3 years old, covered in chocolate. Julian at 8, proudly showing his first soccer trophy. Julian at 15, the day of his middle school graduation. Julian at 22, the day he graduated from college. In every photo I was there, behind him, by his side, holding him, applauding him, loving him. But he no longer saw me. He no longer valued me. He no longer loved me the way a son should love his mother. I put the photos back in the drawer. I closed the drawer gently, and I decided I wouldn't take them out again. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed to move on. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, imagining how it would be. How I would feel seeing Julian after almost 2 months without contact. What expression would be on his face? If he would feel shame, if he would feel regret, if he would feel anything. At 6 in the morning I got up. I showered with hot water, letting the steam fill the bathroom. I dressed in the most elegant suit I had, a gray outfit I had bought at a thrift store, but that looked dignified and professional. I applied makeup carefully. Not too much, just enough to look rested and confident. I combed my hair back into an elegant bun. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I didn't fully recognize. A woman with a straight back, with a steady gaze, with a jaw set in determination. This was me now. No longer the pleading mother. No longer the woman who accepted crumbs. No longer the one who apologized for existing. Caleb arrived promptly at 8. He opened the car door for me with an encouraging smile. Arthur was waiting for us at the entrance of the courthouse with his briefcase full of documents. Are you ready? He asked me. I took a deep breath. I'm ready. We entered the building. Our steps echoed in the marble hallways. The air smelled of old paper and pending justice. And then, turning a corner, I saw him. Julian was standing in front of the courtroom. He was wearing an expensive suit. Beside him was his lawyer, a tall man with a serious expression. And next to him, his wife, looking at me with barely concealed contempt. Our eyes met, and in that moment, when I saw the expression on his face, a mixture of shock, rage, and something like fear, I knew I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. I raised my chin. I held his gaze without blinking, and I walked toward the courtroom with my head held high. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Cream-colored walls, rows of wooden benches, and at the front, the bench where the judge would sit to decide our fate. Arthur guided me to our table. Caleb sat in the first row behind us, his silent presence comforting. On the other side of the room, Julian took a seat next to his lawyer. He didn't look at me again. He kept his eyes front, his jaw tense, his hands clenched on the table. His wife sat behind him, glaring at me, as if I were the villain of this story, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. All rise, announced the bailiff. The judge entered. A man of about 60, completely white hair, serious expression but not cruel. He sat down and signaled us to do the same. Case number 47328, he read from his computer. Eleanor Vance versus Julian Vance. Dispute over access to funds and misappropriation. Let's proceed. Arthur stood up. With your permission, Your Honor, I would like to present my client's situation first. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Arthur began to speak. His voice was clear, firm, professional. He explained how Julian had convinced me to put the account in his name, how he had cut off my access without notice, how he had left me without resources for basic needs. Then he presented the evidence. The bank records projected on a large screen. The monthly deposits of my pension clearly marked, the excessive withdrawals and expenses Julian had made. A charge of $8,300 to a jewelry store, pointed out Arthur. Another of $15,200 to a travel agency. Multiple charges at luxury restaurants, totaling more than $20,000 in the last year. All this while my client survived on rice and beans. The judge studied the documents with attention. He made notes. From time to time he looked up at Julian, who sank lower and lower in his chair. We also have evidence, continued Arthur, that Mrs. Vance deposited $12,500 of her own savings into this account 4 years ago. Money she earned working. Money that Mr. Vance has used as if it were his own. Julian's lawyer stood up. Objection. Your Honor. The account is legally in my client's name. He has every right to manage those funds as he deems appropriate. The judge looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Even when those funds come from his elderly mother's pension? Even when he left her without access to her own money? Even when she needed that money to survive? The lawyer hesitated. Mr. Vance was trying to protect his mother from unnecessary expenses, trying to ensure the money was used wisely. By buying $8,000 worth of jewelry? Asked the judge with a dry tone. Is that protection or appropriation? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The judge turned to Julian. Mr. Vance, stand up. Julian stood up slowly. His face had lost all color. Explain to me, said the judge, how spending $8,000 at a jewelry store protects your mother. Explain to me how $15,000 trips are for her benefit. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. Julian cleared his throat. I thought the money was for family use, he stuttered. For all of us. That money is your mother's pension, responded the judge with a cold voice. It is not a family fund. It is the livelihood of a 64-year-old woman who worked all her life. And you spent it on personal luxuries while she wondered how she was going to eat. Julian lowered his gaze. He had no answer. He couldn't justify the unjustifiable. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Vance, stand up, please. I stood up with trembling legs. Arthur gave me a discreet squeeze on the arm. Tell me in your own words what happened the day you discovered you didn't have access to your account, said the judge with a softer voice. I took a deep breath. I was at the grocery store, I began. I had filled my cart with the basics, simple things. Food, medicine. When I tried to pay, my card was declined. I had to leave everything there and walk out empty-handed. The humiliation. The humiliation was terrible. My voice broke a little. Arthur handed me a glass of water. I drank a sip and continued. I called the bank, and they told me only the account holder could make changes. My son. The son I raised alone. The son for whom I worked 3 jobs. The son to whom I gave everything I had. He had cut off my access without even telling me. And what did you do after that? Asked the judge. I almost called him, I admitted. I almost begged him to explain, but then I realized it wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing. He was punishing me. He was controlling me. He expected me to come pleading, but he didn't do it. I didn't do it, I said with a firm voice. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The judge nodded with what seemed to be approval. He turned to Julian. Mr. Vance, sit down. Julian dropped into his chair. He looked destroyed, small. The judge reviewed more documents. I see here that you also lent $12,000 to your son 3 years ago for a house down payment. Is that correct, Mrs. Vance? Yes, Your Honor, I confirmed. He promised to pay me back in 6 months. He never did. And do you have any document proving that loan? A signed contract? I shook my head, ashamed. No. I trusted his word. He was my son. The judge looked at Julian sternly. Mr. Vance, is it true that your mother lent you that amount? Julian hesitated. His lawyer whispered something urgently. Finally, he nodded. Yes, it's true. and I intended to return it. Another silence. Things got complicated, murmured Julian. You couldn't, or you didn't want to, said the judge. Mr. Vance, let me be very clear. What you did is not only morally reprehensible, it is legally questionable. Cutting off an elderly woman's access to her own pension, spending those funds on personal luxuries, and then having the nerve to say it was to protect her. That borders on financial elder abuse, a serious offense in this state. Julian's lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client is willing to reach an agreement, to restore Mrs. Vance's access immediately, to compensate her for any inconvenience. Arthur stood up. With all due respect, Your Honor, a simple restoration of access is not enough. My client demands compensation for the improperly spent funds. She demands immediate repayment of the $12,000 lent, and she demands that her name be removed from any joint account with Mr. Vance to prevent future abuse. The judge considered this. Mr. Vance, stand up again. Julian stood up with difficulty. He looked about to collapse. Do you have the financial capacity to compensate your mother for the funds you spent from her pension? Asked the judge. Julian looked at his lawyer desperately. I would need time. I don't have that amount liquid right now. How much of your mother's pension did you spend in the last year? Asked the judge, reviewing the documents. Approximately $40,000, according to these records. Money that should have been for her sustenance. Julian did not answer. His wife behind him looked pale, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. The judge took off his glasses and looked at both of us. I am going to take a 15-minute recess. When I return, I will give my decision. I strongly suggest that both parties consider a settlement in this time, because if I have to issue a ruling, Mr. Vance, I assure you that you aren't going to like the result. He got up and left the room. We all stood up. Arthur turned to me. You are doing perfectly, Mrs. Eleanor. Stay firm. On the other side of the room, Julian's lawyer was speaking urgently with him and his wife. I saw how they gestured, how they argued in furious whispers. Then Julian got up. He walked slowly toward our table. Arthur and Caleb tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Julian didn't come with aggression. He came with defeat. Mom, he said with a hoarse voice. His voice sounded strange, as if he hadn't spoken that word in a long time. I looked at him expressionlessly. I said nothing. I just waited. I need to talk to you. Alone. Please. Arthur was about to object, but I raised my hand. It's okay. We went out into the hallway. We stood facing each other, my son and I, united by blood, but separated by an abyss of pain and betrayal. I'm sorry, he said finally. Tears began to form in his eyes. I'm so sorry. Mom, I don't know what happened to me. How did I get to this? I looked at him in silence. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to tell him everything was okay. But it wasn't. And I wasn't going to lie. You know what you did to me, I said with a calm but firm voice. You didn't just take the money. You took my dignity. You made me feel like I was worth nothing, that I was a burden. You waited for me to come crawling to beg you. Julian sobbed. I didn't mean to. Things got out of control. You had control, I responded. Control over my money, control over my life, and you used it to hurt me. How can I fix this? He asked desperately. I looked him straight in the eyes. You are going to restore my access right now. You are going to pay me the $12,000 I lent you within 6 months, or you will sell whatever you have to sell, and you are going to compensate me with $20,000 for the funds you spent from my pension. Or we go back in there, and I let the judge decide. And I assure you, he will be less generous than me. Julian paled. $20,000, Mom, I don't have it. Then sell it, I said sharply. Sell your luxury car, sell your jewelry, sell what you bought with my money. You give me 6 months for the $20,000 and 6 months for the $12,000. Or we see each other in court. You decide. Julian wiped his tears. His hands were shaking. Okay, I'll do it. I promise. Your promises mean nothing to me anymore, Julian, I said with sadness. But legal documents do. Arthur is going to prepare an agreement. You are going to sign it. And if you breach it, you will lose much more than money. We returned to the courtroom. Julian spoke with his lawyer. When the judge returned, Arthur announced that we had reached an agreement. The judge listened to the terms. He nodded with approval. That seems fair to me. Prepare the documents. I want them signed before you leave this building. An hour later, everything was signed and notarized. Julian avoided my gaze. His wife ignored me completely. I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high. I had won, not just the money. I had won my dignity back. The days after the hearing were strange, silent in a different way. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness and abandonment I had felt before. It was a silence of peace, of quiet victory, of knowing I had done the right thing. 2 days after the trial, I received a notification from my bank. My access had been completely restored. I opened the app on my phone, and there it was. My account, my money, my control. There were $11,200 in the account. It wasn't all that should have been there. Julian had spent so much, but it was a start. And with the payments he would have to make, eventually I would recover what belonged to me. The first thing I did was transfer all that money to my new personal account. The account where only I had access, where no one could touch a penny without my permission. Then I closed the joint account with Julian forever. That afternoon, Margaret came to visit me with a cake she had baked. She sat with me at my small kitchen table and looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen so much in life. "You did it," she said simply. "You reclaimed your life." "Yes," I responded, feeling tears threatening to come out. "I did it. But it feels weird, like I won something, but I also lost something." "You lost the illusion," said Margaret softly. "The illusion that your son was who you thought he was. And that hurts. It always hurts. But it is better to live in painful truth than in comfortable lies." She was right. I had been living in a lie for years, pretending Julian still loved me, pretending his coldness was temporary, pretending things would go back to how they were before. But now I lived in the truth. And although it hurt, it was also liberating. Caleb continued visiting me regularly. He took me to places I had never had the courage to visit alone. To the art museum, to the theater, to free concerts in the park. He showed me there was life beyond the pain, that there was beauty beyond betrayal. One afternoon he took me to a small cafe overlooking the river. We sat on the terrace while the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. "Mrs. Eleanor, I have to tell you something," he began with a serious voice. My heart raced. "What's wrong? I've been thinking a lot about all this. About how you helped me years ago. About how I could help you now. And I realized something. Life is a circle. The kindness we give returns to us, sometimes in ways we never imagine." I smiled. I always believed in that, although these last few months made me doubt it. "But it's true," insisted Caleb. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. And look now. I could give you back some of that when you needed it. That's how the universe works. Kindness is never lost." His words touched me deeply. He was right. I had spent so many years giving everything to Julian, hoping he would give it back to me. But the universe gave that kindness back to me through Caleb, through people who owed me nothing but chose to help me anyway. 3 weeks after the hearing, Julian made his first payment, $5,000 deposited into my account. No message came with the deposit. No note. No additional apology. Just the money. It was enough for now. I used part of that money to pay Margaret back the $150 she had lent me when I needed it most. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. "You helped me when no one else did," I told her, putting the money in her hands. "Let me do this, please." She finally accepted with tears in her eyes. "You are a good woman, Eleanor. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." With the rest of the money, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought new clothes. Not second-hand clothes. Not old and worn clothes. New clothes that made me feel beautiful, that made me feel alive. I also allowed myself small luxuries. A subscription to a movie platform. New books. Fresh flowers for my apartment. Simple things that filled my life with color. One morning, while drinking coffee by my window watching the street, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said cautiously. Grandma, responded a small voice that made my heart stop. It was Mia, Julian's daughter, my 9-year-old granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen for almost 4 months. Mia, I whispered, feeling tears spring instantly. Baby, how are you? I miss you, Grandma, she said with a trembling voice. Dad won't let me visit you. He says you are fighting. But I don't understand why. I just want to see you. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I miss you too, my love. So much. I took Dad's phone when he was in the shower, she confessed. I don't have much time, but I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted you to know that I didn't forget you. I could never forget you either, I told her, weeping openly now. You are my treasure, my beautiful girl. Will you come to my birthday next month? She asked hopefully. I'm going to be 10. I don't know if your dad is going to invite me, honey, I answered honestly. I don't care if he invites you or not, she said, with a determination that surprised me. I want you there. It's my birthday, and I decide who comes. I have to hang up, Grandma. Dad just got out of the shower. I love you. I love you too, my sweetheart. So much. The call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand, crying. But this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of love. My granddaughter hadn't forgotten me. She still loved me. She still needed me. And that meant not everything was lost. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. An invitation handmade with colored crayons. To Grandma Eleanor. From Mia. My birthday party. Please come. Inside was a note in the messy handwriting of a 9-year-old girl. Grandma, I told Dad that if you don't come, I don't want the party. He said it's okay for you to come. Please come. I miss you a lot. I called Caleb immediately. I need a favor. Whatever it is, he responded without hesitation. I need help buying the best birthday gift for a 10-year-old girl. And I need the courage to face my son again. Caleb laughed. The gift we can get easily. And the courage, Mrs. Eleanor. You already have it. You just need to remember it. On the day of Mia's birthday, I got ready carefully. I put on one of my new dresses. I did my makeup. I did my hair. I wanted my granddaughter to see me radiant. I wanted her to know that her grandmother was okay. Caleb accompanied me. He insisted on being present in case I needed moral support. We arrived at Julian's house at 3 in the afternoon, exactly as the invitation said. The door was open. There were balloons and decorations everywhere, kids running and laughing. And there, in the middle of it all, was my Mia. When she saw me, her little face lit up like a Christmas tree. Grandma, she shouted, running toward me. I caught her in my arms and hugged her with all my strength. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and cake. She felt warm and alive and perfect. You came, she sobbed against my shoulder. I thought you wouldn't come. Nothing in this world could have stopped me from coming, I whispered in her ear. Nothing. Julian appeared in the doorway. He looked at us uncomfortably. His wife was behind him with an illegible expression. Eleanor, said my son with a tense voice. Thanks for coming. Thanks for allowing me to come, I responded with polite coldness. Mia took me by the hand and dragged me inside. She showed me every decoration. She introduced me to all her friends. She made me feel as if I were the guest of honor. During the whole afternoon, Julian avoided me. We didn't speak beyond forced pleasantries, but it didn't matter. I hadn't come for him. I had come for my granddaughter. When they blew out the candles and cut the cake, Mia looked for me among all the guests. She smiled at me, and in that moment I knew this was enough. I hadn't recovered my son. Maybe I would never recover him. But I hadn't lost my granddaughter, and that was more valuable than any amount of money. At the end of the party, when the guests left, I helped clean up, despite the protests of Julian's wife. Mia stayed glued to me the whole time, as if she feared that if she let go, I would disappear. When it was finally time to go, Mia hugged me tight. You're going to come see me again, right? You're not going to disappear again? I will come, I promised her. I swear. Now that I know you want me here, nothing is going to stop me. Julian walked me to the door. Before I left, he spoke in a low voice. Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but thank you. Thank you for coming. Mia has been sad for months. Today was the first time I saw her really happy. She shouldn't pay for our mistakes, I responded. Children should never pay for the mistakes of adults. You're right, he murmured. Listen, I know things between us are never going to be like before. I understand. I accept it. But Mia needs you, so if you want to visit her, you are welcome. Always. I nodded. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was something, a small bridge over the abyss that separated us. I left that house feeling different. I hadn't recovered my son, but I had recovered something more important. I had recovered my dignity, my strength, my life. And I had kept my granddaughter's love. And that was everything. It has been 6 months since that day in court. 6 months since I recovered my life. And now, sitting on the balcony of my apartment with a cup of hot coffee in my hands, watching the sunrise paint the sky with colors I didn't stop to appreciate before, I can say with certainty that I am a different woman. Julian kept up with the payments. Not all on time. Some arrived weeks late, but they arrived. The $32,000 he owed me between what was lent and what was stolen were deposited into my account during these months. The last payment arrived a week ago, without a message, without an additional apology, just the money, and that's fine. I didn't need his words. I needed justice, and I got it. With that money, I did something I never imagined I would do. I invested in myself. I hired a financial advisor, a colleague of Caleb's, who helped me open a savings account with good interest, to plan my future, to ensure I would never depend on anyone again. I also fixed up my apartment. I painted the walls a warm color that makes everything feel cozier. I bought new furniture to replace the old and worn ones. I hung pictures that make me smile every time I see them. I turned this place into a real home, my home, not a place where I simply existed waiting for someone to remember me, but a place where I live fully. Caleb is still part of my life. He comes to visit me at least once a week. Sometimes he takes me to new places. Sometimes we simply sit and talk for hours. He tells me about his projects. I tell him about my small daily victories. There is a genuine friendship between us that I value more than words can express. A month ago, he introduced me to a woman named Cecilia Bennett, his mother. A 70-year-old lady with a contagious laugh and a life story that made me cry. She too had gone through difficulties with her children. She too had had to learn to set boundaries. She too had had to rebuild herself. We became friends immediately. Now we get together every week with Margaret to drink tea and share our lives. 3 women who understand the pain of being forgotten mothers. 3 women who decided not to let that pain define us. My relationship with Julian remains distant. We see each other at Mia's birthdays, at school celebrations where she participates, on important dates. We are cordial, polite, but the trust that once existed between us is broken, and honestly, I don't know if it will ever be repaired. But I have learned to be at peace with that. I have learned that I cannot force anyone to love me the way I need to be loved. I have learned that some relationships, even blood ones, have to transform. And sometimes that transformation means distance. It means boundaries. It means protecting your own heart. Mia, however, is my light. I see her twice a week, Wednesdays after school and Saturday afternoons. Julian brings her to my apartment and picks her up a few hours later. During that time, it's just her and me. We cook together. We do crafts. We read books. We talk about her dreams. She tells me things she would never tell her parents. Her fears, her hopes, her worries about school. And I listen to her with all my attention. I give her advice when she asks for it. I hug her when she needs comfort. And I tell her every day that she is loved, that she is valuable, that she is enough. Because I want her to grow up knowing something I forgot for many years, that her value does not depend on what others think of her, that her dignity is inherent, that she deserves respect and unconditional love. Last week, Mia told me something that made me cry. We were baking cookies when suddenly she stopped mixing the dough and looked at me very seriously. "Grandma, when I grow up I want to be like you," she said. "Like me?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, strong, brave, capable of standing alone even when things are hard." Dad told me a little bit about what happened. Not all the details because he says I'm too young. "But I know you fought for yourself, and that is very brave." I hugged her tight, feeling my heart expand in my chest. You are already brave, my love. More than you think. I have started doing things I always wanted to do, but never allowed myself. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I discovered I have a certain talent for landscapes. My paintings aren't masterpieces, but they fill me with joy every time I finish one. I also started writing, not just in my private notebook, but stories. Stories about women like me, women who were forgotten but found themselves, women who rose from the ashes of their pain and built something beautiful. Cecilia convinced me to share one of my stories at a writing group for seniors that meets at the library. I was terrified, but I did it. And when I finished reading, there were tears in the eyes of several people. They told me my story had touched their hearts, that they saw themselves reflected in it, and I realized something powerful. My pain wasn't just mine. My story wasn't unique. There were thousands, maybe millions of women like me. Women who gave everything for their families only to be discarded when they were no longer convenient. Women who deserved to be heard, to be validated, to be honored. 2 weeks ago, I did something I never thought I would do. I donated $5,000 to a shelter for elderly women in abandoned situations. Women who didn't have the luck I had, who didn't have a Caleb appear in their lives, who didn't have an Arthur to fight for them. When I handed over the check, the shelter director hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know how many lives you are going to change with this," she told me. But I did know, because someone changed mine. And now, it was my turn to do the same for others. Yesterday afternoon, I was watering the plants on my balcony when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was Julian. Alone. Without Mia. Without prior notice. "Can we talk?" he asked with a soft voice. I let him in. I offered him coffee. We sat in my new living room with an uncomfortable distance between us. "Mom," he started, and then stopped. He cleared his throat. He tried again. "I've been going to therapy. Since the trial," my wife insisted. "And I've been working on a lot of things. I'm glad," I said sincerely. "The therapist made me see things I didn't want to see. How I treated you. How I used you. How I took for granted everything you did for me. And I want you to know that I am ashamed, deeply ashamed." "It's okay," I said, although I wasn't sure it was. "No, it's not okay," he responded with a broken voice. "Nothing I did is okay. I treated you worse than a stranger, worse than anyone. And you are my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for me." Tears ran down his face now. "I don't know if someday you can forgive me, and I would understand if you can't. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, truly, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better, to be the son you deserved from the beginning." I said nothing for a long moment. I just watched him cry. I watched the man he had become, finally facing what he had done. "Julian," I said finally, "I don't know if things between us will ever be like before. Honestly, I don't think they can be. There are things that once broken cannot be completely repaired. But I appreciate your apology, and I appreciate that you are working on yourself." He nodded, wiping his tears. "That's all I can ask." He stayed for another hour. We talked about superficial things, about the weather, about Mia and her school performance, about his work. It was strange, but not terrible. And when he left, he hugged me. A clumsy and uncomfortable hug, but a hug nonetheless. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship. I don't know if we will ever be close again. But I know that I am going to be okay regardless of what happens. Because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life. My value does not depend on how others treat me. My dignity is not subject to anyone's approval. My life belongs to me, and I am enough. I always was. This morning I woke up with the sun coming through my window. I made my favorite coffee. I sat on my new balcony. And I smiled. I smiled because I am alive. Because I have a roof over my head that I paid for with my own effort. Because I have food in my pantry and money in my account. Because I have true friends who value me. Because I have a granddaughter who loves me unconditionally. I smiled because I survived. And not only did I survive, I was reborn. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 64 years old, and my life is just beginning. To all the women reading this, who perhaps see themselves reflected in my story, I want to tell you something. If someone makes you feel invisible, if someone discards you as if you were worth nothing, if someone abuses your kindness and your love, remember this: you are valuable, you matter, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to defend yourself. Don't be afraid to stand alone if necessary, because sometimes the greatest strength is not in enduring, it is in saying enough. And you, reading this now, tell me, have you ever felt like someone tried to erase you from your own story? Did you ever have to fight for your dignity against someone who was supposed to love you? Did you ever rise from the ashes of betrayal and discover you were stronger than you thought? Let me know in the comments. Because our stories matter, our voices deserve to be heard, and together we are unstoppable. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And always remember, it is never too late to reclaim your life. It is never too late to bloom. It is never too late to be who you were always meant to be. With love and respect, Eleanor.